5 times, hunted by more than 3,000 armed soldiers, hated by bishops, priests, emperors, and also envied for his following. He wrote letters which angered the leaders of many and was accused of murder, theft, torture, even though he was found innocent. Still, despite all this, this man stood for the truth. He stood for and claimed that Jesus is not just a Lord, but the Lord. This is the story of Athanasius waging spiritual war against the rest of the world. Early on in his life, he managed to find a nice bishop by the name of Alexander in the city of Alexandria, Egypt. He was outside playing along the river, playing at like he was baptizing some of his friends. He's maybe 14, 15 years old. You know, the bishop didn't think he knew what he was doing. So he went out there to go tell him that he was doing it wrong. And in interviewing and interrogating these youngsters, he found that their grasp of the doctrine of the church and the teaching of baptism was so firm that he had no choice but to accept Athanasius' baptisms as accepted by the church. 14 years old. How many 14-year-olds do you see baptizing people in churches nowadays? You don't see it happen. He was a very smart person. He was probably raised in the bishop's house from the time that he met the bishop here at the baptism. He went on, studied with several of the martyrs, including one, Peter the martyr, and wrote 2 books, well, 2 papers. They might not be books nowadays. They were put in chapter form later. But one was called On the Incarnation of the Word. It is the most influential book, writing in the early church on the incarnation of Christ and the deity of Christ, which was why he was chosen to go to accompany Bishop Alexander as the archdeacon in the Council of Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea was the first and largest of its time, a council of the entire church of the Roman Empire, from the easternmost reaches in Russia and India, all the way to France, and even some in Spain. Probably about 300 bishops alone, about maybe 700 to 800 priests in attendance at this one council to counter a movement called Arianism. Athanasius accompanied Bishop Alexander as the archdeacon and was one of the firmest voices for the Orthodox view of Christ's deity, even quoted as saying, "Christ, Jesus that I know, cannot be less than God." This led to Arius, the leader of the Arian movement, who taught that Jesus was not God, but was a creature of God's, that God created to take his place on the cross to intercede for us, but not the same as God. So, through his works here in the Council of Nicaea, the bishop Alexander, coming close to the end of his life, was retiring and placed in his position as the lead bishop in Alexandria, Athanasius. He was so resolved in his defense of the deity of Christ after the council, despite the fact that Constantine had him exiled again, accused of the theft of grain shipments that were going to go to Constantinople. So he was exiled again by Athanasius twice, by Constantine twice. First time when he was accused of this, Then second time, when he was accused of not just that, but murder. He was accused of murdering a man named Arsenius, who also accused of removing the man's hand. In his hearing, after he was forced to go to a hearing in Constantinople, he brought in Arsenius with his arms covered, and in a grandiose manner takes the cover off of his hands, both of them, to show that his hands were still intact. Kind of a sense of humor, considering everyone said that he was both dead and limbless. With both of his arms and legs on, showed to the council he was shown as innocent. However, because of the grain shipments, Constantine still had him exiled in 335 and accepted him back again. He kept going back and forth 5 different times. The third time by a guy named Julian, the second time by Constantine's son, second time by Constantine's son Constantius, third time by Julian. When he returned to his position, he was so celebrated that so many people came out of the city of Alexandria. Witnesses said that it was as if another Nile River had sprung in Alexandria and had flooded out to meet him in the desert, several miles away, when they heard messengers tell of his return. Throughout his life, and despite all the obstacles he faced, Athanasius was finally granted entrance back into his service as a bishop after 2 more times being exiled. One early church historian was quoted in the Encyclopedia Britannica as saying, "The whole world against Athanasius, and Athanasius against it. 1/2 years spent in doubtful trial, which of the 2 in the end should prevail. The side which had all, or else the parts which had no friends but God and death. The one had a defender of his innocency, and the other a finisher of all his troubles." In conclusion, we need to learn that just like Athanasius here, there are things that we believe about Christ, about the gospel, that we need to stand for and fight for. As it says in 1 Timothy 6, we must fight the good fight of faith.